this. And it looks like the files that were uploaded were just things that were lying around on somebody's computer, some BOEE employee's computer. Some of the files were just a page with one sentence. This is a blank ballot. Others were much bigger. One was even the installation file for a certain Macintosh programming tool. That the system was not a ballot file at all, but it would be rejected by the system for being too big. But one of the files, which I have here, one of the files was a 937-page PDF document. It appears to be the 937 invitation letters that BOEE sent to registered voters. Each page contains the name and voter ID number of a real voter, along with the 16-character PIN that is the only password a voter needs in order to use the system in the real election. We examined the file metadata. The author of the file is Paul Stenbjorn. It appears that this may be the real thing. We found the document on the testbed server, a system that BOEE invited the world to break into, and that we showed could be broken into very easily. We have no way of knowing who else has access to this. The pins in this document are the most critical secret to protect in the whole voting system. If digital ballot return were still in use, a criminal could use them to vote in the name of every single voter and keep the real voters from voting. So my question is, why was this file on the testbed system? This isn't the sort of thing that you would actually need to use to test this feature that was apparently being tested. I'm just deeply concerned that BOEE does not take security seriously, and that it fails to appreciate the security challenges that are faced by any internet voting system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to put a couple of questions. These may be to anybody, whoever wants to answer them, but the first question I think you did answer, but I want to, find out for sure. You're saying that right now we do not have the capacity, under any circumstances, to have secure internet voting.
I'm saying that this is a technical problem we do not yet know how to solve, no.
Mm-hmm. And obviously I'm out of my element here, so bear with me. What about, the most sensitive secrets that governments have, and, encryption? And what if you have two keys, one on one side and one on the other side? Wouldn't that kind of system, if plausibly deployed, couldn't that work?
So the government's most sensitive secrets are not put onto computers that are connected to the internet. That's a large part of how we protect them. And it's exactly because internet security is such a difficult problem that we don't trust internet-connected computers to keep those secrets safe.
Well, what about a two-key system, though?
Can I?
Yes.
If I may, the gentleman who invented the system you're referring to is Dr. Ronald Rivest of MIT. He was one of the signatories on the letter which we sent to you just before this trial period began, urging you not to move forward with this experiment. And if the man who invented it thinks it's not a good idea and his invention isn't good enough to succeed in doing what you're talking about, it's hard for me to imagine why the rest of us mere mortals would be able to use his invention to do that.
Right. But wasn't it good to have a test case? I mean, the very fact that you're here and...
Oh, absolutely. We
okay.
think it's wonderful that it was tested, and now we should put it aside and come back and look at it again maybe in another 10 years.
I'd like to add something to that. I think it's extremely gratifying that there are election officials like Roki Silliman, like the D.C. Board of Elections and Ethics, that are willing to put this kind of transparent effort forward and allow for public testing. I think that there are some obvious critical lessons learned here, as you said, why we're here. I'm concerned that we do learn the right lessons. You can patch holes, you can fix the system, you can try a different system, but the biggest problem here is the internet. And until you have a different internet, it's not likely that any such system is going to be able to assure the secrecy and security of the votes. This is done with the motivation of helping military and overseas voters, largely who've had a really unfair shake for a lot of years, and we want to make things better for them. The MOVE Act was passed with the idea of expanding their opportunity, but it didn't require electronic return of voted ballots, and these are precisely the reasons why that was not included.
Can we have half a loaf? Can we communicate with the voters via internet but have them send back by fax or some other methodology the ballot itself?
I think that's much less risky, and sending the unfilled ballots over the internet and having voters fill them in removes a lot of the problem that we've seen. And in cases where there's not another practical way to communicate ballots to voters before the election, that may be the best solution on the balance of the risks.
But you said, and I know you can't give me certainty perhaps, but you say it's much less risky and that, on balance, is it risky that nevertheless?
It is. One of the problems that we have here is that we've done this test on the digital vote-by-mail system, but D.C. and a lot of other jurisdictions around the country are currently using some email return of voted ballots and some fax return of voted ballots. And I would submit that there's not a lot of difference today. Back in the old days, fax was a dedicated phone line to another dedicated phone line. But now I can send faxes to and from my computer, and it goes over the internet and never touches a phone line. So what we're talking about is an alternate version of internet voting if you use those methods for electronic return. And I think you have to take that on.
How can that be made secure, though? Because you do use the internet as part of the delivery device, so to speak.
Exactly. And I think that's a concern. And until we do things like opening up the email servers to tests such as this test, you're not going to find out exactly the level of vulnerabilities that exist.
There is no perfectly secure system, and that's, I think, a key point here is we need to not expect perfection, but at the same time recognize where there are major problems, and this showed a system that had major problems. There are problems certainly with fax and email voting. There's also problems with plain old U.S. mail voting.
But those problems would be limited in scope, right? That is to say, you don't get into the whole operation. You may be able to frustrate a particular
We call
vote.
that retail versus wholesale attacks, and this is a wholesale attack.
If I may, it's a little bit like the difference between all of the voters riding together in one airplane and each voter driving to the polls individually. If everyone is riding on the same plane and there's a problem, or if someone wants to disrupt the election by disrupting the airplane, then all the eggs are in one basket. Everyone is affected together. And in fact, it's...
But can I stop you there because I want to understand this? Nevertheless, I mean, given the sophistication and the speed of computers, even if you do it at retail, you could have some operation that you create that would allow you to do it at retail at great speed, no?
Well, so that is a concern, but there are some wholesale concerns with ballot distribution. For instance, if I can manipulate the server to give voters the wrong ballot, or a ballot that is marked in a certain way so I can tell who voted, or a ballot that will just be counted as invalid when it gets back to Washington, then I can attack through ballot distribution too. But the risk is quite a bit less because that server that's connected to the internet isn't processing the returned votes. So there's much less opportunity for me to do something there that will allow me to change all the votes.
And you said something that was also disturbing with respect to this test, namely that a period of time went by and there were no sufficient, or you don't know that there were any sufficient red flags to say that it had been broken into. And so I would take it that even with these other methodologies, and even though the scope of potential mischief would be limited, as to those, one further thing we should have is a very clear use of these red flags so that it's immediately known whether someone is attempting to do this. Do you know whether on these alternative methods we have sufficient, notice built in?
Well, it's hard to say what sufficient notice would be, because it would certainly be possible with today's technology to attack it in a way that nobody would notice. That's the worry that all of the scientists that I've spoken with share about Internet voting. What we can do is a best effort. And for voters who otherwise are going to have a very difficult time participating in the election, then making a best effort at ballot distribution is a compromise that may well be worthwhile. But digital ballot return, we worry, has potentially greater social consequences because of the fact that someone could centrally change all of the votes.
Mm-hmm.
There's an additional concern, too, which is that recently the District of Columbia passed a requirement for voter-verified ballots and post-election audits. A system that doesn't provide a hard copy independent record of the voter's intent is essentially not an auditable system, not a recountable system with legitimacy. If your ballots are coming back digitally, and then there's a printout that occurs in D.C., but it's not a printout that the voter has witnessed,